Mark Miller is co-architect of the Xanadu Operating Company, designing the hypertext system about which you're going to hear. He is also author of the Agoric Open Systems papers, which caught the attention of Bill Tullen and Don Lavoie and the rest of us in the Agorics project, well, in what became the Agorics project. And he is co-director of the Agorics project from afar in California, but we hope we'll have him here more next term. Before working at Xanadu, Mark was at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, and I'll let the introduction go at that and turn it over to Mark.
Okay. Before I get into the talk itself, one caution. I know I'm speaking to an interdisciplinary audience. I've designed the talk for that purpose, but being at heart a computer nerd, I will occasionally maybe fall into jargon, so if I do so, please stop me and ask for clarification. Okay. What we've done at Xanadu is we've designed a new medium for discourse among groups of people through publishing and reading electronic documents. Why have we done this? And why is it that we have great hopes for the system? Well, because, at Xanadu, we have no lack of ambition. What we're really interested in, seriously, is significantly improving the nature of society. This is a very big claim. The reason why, of all the things we could do to significantly improve the nature of society, we chose to do this is because the process of discourse in society, the process through which our knowledge is socially evolved, makes a hell of a difference to the nature of society and the nature of social evolution. So the beginning of the talk is going to talk about introductory material about why media matter, and an introduction to our way of thinking about how media matter and how to design better media. Then, motivated by that, I'll be going through the particulars of the media that we've built and explaining its features in terms of those criteria. And then there'll be some concluding remarks. Next. Okay, what we want to do is improve things. Now, society is an extremely complicated system. How do you improve extremely complicated systems? This can be a very, very difficult intellectual challenge because it's very difficult to know which way is up. Well, Doug Engelbart, back in the 60s, when the information technology we had was pencil and paper, was imagining, in many ways, the information technology we have today and trying to explain to people why it would make a really significant difference to their life, to their ability to express ideas. So he tried to explain to them his vision off on the right, and he found himself unable to. Found himself unable to really communicate it to people. So instead what he did was he did a little experiment. He tied a pencil to a brick and said, okay, I can't explain how to make tools for expressing ideas better, let's make it worse. So he tied a pencil to a brick and he handed it to people and said, okay, now write. And people found it very, very difficult. So after that experiment, he was much better able to explain what it means to go in the other direction. Next. Well, through most of this century, Karl Marx has performed another pencil and brick experiment. The society that we have is the one in the middle there, and we've just had an incredible demonstration of what it means to make a society much worse off. We now understand much better which direction is down. However, let's not assume that the society we're in now is the best of all possible worlds. is there any way we can learn from the lesson of which direction is down to figure out how to improve things? Well, what made the difference between how well these two societies did? Well, there's been a lot of attention to the difference between open markets and closed markets, the fact that our society has relatively freer markets than than the totalitarian societies. And there's certainly plenty of expertise at this university to go into that in incredibly more depth. What this talk is going to concentrate on is the other part of that, which is open media, and the difference that open media has made to the nature of society. Next. Okay. How is it that our knowledge evolves? What is the process through which discourse in society, people bouncing ideas off of each other, ends up with a process of learning, a process of progress in knowledge? How is it that eventually we get better knowledge? Well, Karl Popper's big insight was that you can think of knowledge evolving very much like the way you think of other things evolving through a process of variation and selection. And Popper drew the analogy that variation is like conjecture, people trying out ideas, and selection happens through refutation. Popper's student Bartley softened and generalized Popper's notion from refutation to criticism, that things are not definitively refuted, but there's this ongoing process of criticism and criticism of criticism, such that those ideas that survive that process tend in general to be better than those that don't. Next. Were the totalitarian societies actually worse off as a result of not having open media? When it's impossible to make arguments publicly, when it's impossible for different points of view to actually battle it out openly, then it's very, very difficult for people to actually make it to a hard truth. It's very difficult for the hard truths to come out. The only defense the population has is mistrust and cynicism of the official truths. And in those cases where the official truths are correct, it leads the population astray. So, for example, closed media disease led to pseudoscience in Russia and neo-Nazism in East Germany because, for example, one of the few good things that the Soviets had to say about themselves is they weren't Nazis. Okay, can we create better media? Maybe this isn't the best of all possible worlds. Maybe our media is the best of all possible media. Well, what does our media consist of? TV is so bad it's a joke. It's really impossible for intellectual discourse of ideas beyond the size of a slogan to get expressed there. Books and journals, though, have very good reputation, quite rightly so, especially compared to television. But the problem is that in books and journals, the process of argumentation is very, very opaque. It's very hard to follow arguments. When somebody makes a statement of a position in one book or journal and somebody else writes an article published somewhere else that argues with it, and then someone else makes a counter-argument to that, to go from the original, people who read the original, those arguments and counter-arguments are almost impossible to find. And if they're impossible to find, it's still very difficult for hard truths to rise to the top. So what we're trying to do here is to facilitate the evolution of knowledge and build a medium in which publication is easier. That's the replication of ideas, in which the constant editing and reformulating of ideas is easier. That's the variation aspect of the evolution of ideas. One particular powerful kind of variation in evolution is what in biology is known as sex, the recombination of working pieces that have evolved separately into in the case of biology, into new creatures that combine the best of both of their parents. In the case of ideas, for example, interdisciplinary work, for example, documents that try to pull together ideas that have not been thought of together before. And finally, the process of criticism and the visibility of criticism in order to apply selective pressure. Next. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about the particulars of the system that we built. We spend some time on the idea of links and hyperlinks, connections between things that enable this visibility of criticism and this ability to navigate critical threads. This ability to the variation aspect, and especially the recombination aspect, is something we call transclusion. The way in which our royalty scheme builds on top of our notion of transclusion. Talk about our support for history and version tracking, and our support for something called detectors, so you can watch for change. Then, depending on how much time there is, I'll go into remaining issues of the system. Next. Okay. Our starting point in trying to design this medium is the literary tradition. We weren't trying to say, we as rational creatures are able to figure out from scratch what a new medium for reading and writing could be and figure out its nature without proper respect for what has worked in the world. The literary tradition is an extraordinary thing in the world. And one part of the literary tradition, a very important part, is the mechanisms it has for connecting documents to each other, for building a context for documents through these various kinds of citations between documents. Next. So what we propose to do is to build engines of citation. Imagine yourself in front of your word processor on your desktop, but now that word processor is hooked to a common repository of documents, which is hooked and turned to a network. And the document you're reading contains a quote in it from another document. Well, you can think of that quote as kind of this transparent window in the document you're reading, through which you're seeing a piece of another document behind it. And then, by just clicking on the quote mark, you dive through the document that you're reading into the document behind that document. So you dive not only into the document that's being quoted, but you dive right into the part of that document that the quote was taken from. So in the context of a system like this, things cannot be quoted out of context, or at least not quoted out of context without it being very visible that the author intended to do that. And the result is that the reading experience is that no longer is the reader stuck in one document during the reading experience. That document is the stepping off point to navigating the whole web of literature that is connected to that document. From our point of view, conventional computer document systems, non-hypertext systems, are based on a fundamental misunderstanding as to where the meaning of a document resides. They put all this effort into representing the content of the document very, very well. Lots of formatting, lots of pictures, lots of indentation. But each document is an island disconnected from all the other documents. And as if all of the meaning of the document resided purely in the words that made up the document. From our point of view, the meaning of the document is a combination of the content of the document and the whole web of connections that it has to other documents. When I jump into a new literature, when I jump into some field that I'm not familiar with and I start reading papers, initially I'm very confused because those papers have a whole ongoing set of controversies in mind. They're trying to defend certain points of view and repulse attacks from various, repulse other potential attacks. And without having easy access to that whole context, it's very hard to jump into a new literature and understand those papers. Next. Well, once we create this web, aren't people going to get lost? Isn't this going to be terribly disorienting? Well, the very links that enable the web to be woven together also enable the creation of documents that serve as guides or maps to selected slices of that web. As somebody makes a trail through the web and gathers together what he thinks is an interesting cut through it, he can represent that path or that set of paths, his guide to the web, as another document that contains links into the web. And a reader who jumps into a new literature can start out by using one of these guides, following into the web, and then only when he feels more comfortable directly in the web, start exploring the web from those taking off points. Next. So far, the links that I'm talking about don't help that much with the critical process. What it's trying to do is the links that I've been talking about so far we can refer to as forward links, where when document A cites document B, a reader of document A can dive through the link and find document B. The notion of hyperlink is to add to that the notion of following links in the other direction. That when I'm reading a document, I can be constantly, effectively asking the question, what other documents cite this document? So I not only can easily find the documents that this document cites, I can find the documents that cite this document, and in particular that cite a particular part of the document that I'm reading right now, that's right now on my screen. So the process of reading can turn into one of exercising fine-grained skepticism, where you're always effectively asking, what's the best set of arguments against what I'm reading right now? What's the best reason not to believe this? And what are the best arguments against that? Well, next. The asymmetry we have now in paper right now, it's very difficult to follow a link forward, follow a link from a document to the document it's citing. You have to go down to the library, you have to look something up in the card catalog or whatever. It's a real pain compared to just flipping the page and going to the next page of the document you're reading. But trying to find documents that cite this document in paper is even extraordinarily more difficult than that. We claim that this asymmetry in paper between following links forward and following links backward has had emergent pathological effects on the nature of scholarly communities, and that the introduction of bidirectional links into scholarly discourse we hope will solve some of these pathologies. So let's talk about the pathology. Many people here are members of some scholarly field which has spontaneously fissioned into separate schools which have a great deal of difficulty talking to each other and engaging in true intellectual engagement. Now, part of our ideology as scholars is that the way to facilitate that intellectual engagement is for each of the schools not only to pay attention to itself and cite it, this over here is a set of documents within a school where there's a lot of sort of this cycle of mutually supportive citation. And over here is another school. But these two schools have these two different points of view that you'd like to engage with each other. Our ideology as scholars is that the way that happens is by documents in this school criticizing opposing points of view in that school and vice versa. And that through this process of trying to criticize each other and answer the criticisms, that we understand what the differences are and we get the intellectual engagement. in fact, what happens because of the asymmetry of link following is that to the students who are raised within this literature, what they see, their exposure to the other literature is by following these links and finding out which documents from the other literature are most safely criticized, most safely refuted by documents within their own point of view. They're repeatedly immunized against the point of view of the other literature. And that by simply allowing the links to be followed in both directions, then a student within this school who's at this document can find this telling criticism of it from the point of view of the other literature. And that therefore, we hope that this will result in better intellectual engagement between these points of view. Next. Another very important notion in our system is something called transclusion. The idea of transclusion is that a document is just an arrangement of material from a shared information pool. There's a shared pool of content, and different documents are just different arrangements of text from the same underlying shared pool. And therefore, one can build a new document by just reaching in through existing documents, borrowing material, and making a new document out of it. One of the things that I find very frustrating as an author is the need to constantly re-explain to the audience so many ideas which have already been explained well elsewhere. And it's very much like, I think a good analogy is a blacksmith in a village before an interstate highway system, where he has to rebuild so much of the shoe from scratch. And what we hope to do with transclusion is facilitate a better division of knowledge and labor in the construction of statements of point of view, in that an author who's trying to say something new can concentrate on saying the new thing and just depend on being able to build paths of easy accessibility for his readers to the existing explanations that he wants to draw on. Next. Well, the fact that a document is just an arrangement of material from an underlying pool has another interesting effect. The links in Xanadu are connections not to a document, but to the content in that underlying shared pool. So when somebody offers a different arrangement and borrows this material and puts it elsewhere in this document, all the links stay attached to that. Next. This ability to easily borrow material from other documents would seem to raise problems both of plagiarism and of and the plagiarism issue is solved simply by the fact that the original authorship of the material in the pool that's being borrowed is preserved and visible to the reader. And this is what I'm about to say is the one aspect of what I'll be presenting which is not currently implemented in the software. Everything else I'm describing in this talk is implemented and running. What we've built towards but don't have implemented yet is also support for a royalty scheme. This is with respect to being a large-scale electronic publishing system. It's not necessarily as relevant within the university. Where of the stream of money coming in from a reader, it gets divided up not just to the author of the document that the reader's reading, but also among the authors of the material that document consists of. Next. Evolution needs to proceed by constant revision, by constantly trying to improve and restate things. a revision is simply another arrangement of material that is also posted on the system. The fact that all the underlying material is shared means that you can have lots of different arrangements of it at very low cost. And the important thing is that the criticism of an idea that helps with the selection process, because those criticisms stay attached to the material and show up in other revisions of that material, of the overall document, the variation process of the evolution of knowledge doesn't leave the selection process behind. It would be fundamentally broken if a link onto this document that attempted to criticize an idea as it was presented in this context was not findable by a reader of this document in which the same idea was restated. Next. As documents are edited, they also leave behind a historical trail. An historical trail is just an arrangement of arrangements, the successive arrangements of the document that result from successive edits to the document. And the reason why this is very important in a social context is, as we all know, being, those of us who have rubbed up against the history of ideas, the genesis of an idea, the process by which it came to be, is also a very important part of the context that enables us to understand the idea. Next. A participant in this medium is a participant. In general, a participant in discourse in society has this problem of how do they keep up, how do they stay current, how do they know what's new out there that they need to pay attention to. In Xanadu, we have a notion of detectors, which essentially you can set this little radar dish going, metaphorically, to watch this particular set of documents, and when there's a new edition of any of these documents that you haven't seen before, these two things are the ones that sort of popped out in this detector. Those are the ones that the guy who posted this detector hasn't already seen. Those things pop out and come to attention. Now, the reason this is important is, once again, if ideas are going to be improved and modified, and especially if once criticisms are posted, things are edited to respond to those criticisms, then the literature itself becomes much more dynamic. Once the literature is dynamic, now you've got the issue of, okay, there's a new edition of this. I've already read this one. Do I have to read this whole thing again? And the answer is no. You can do essentially what we refer to as differential reading. You can read the differences. You can, by displaying the old document with annotations on it that show what the edits were to get from the old document to the new document. Next. A particular articulation of an idea frequently becomes realized later on that was the genesis of a subject area and the genesis of a whole new literature about some topic. In this system, you can post what we call link detectors to watch a particular document and ask, show me new links that are made to this document that I haven't already seen. And then when those new links happen, you get informed of them. You can use this for electronic mail on the one hand by having each user have a canonical document that represents their mailbox. Other people send the mail by just linking to it. And then the detector goes off and tells you your new mail. But much more interestingly than that, any document that becomes the symbol for a subject area comes by convention to be a meeting point a condensation point for discussion about that subject area, so that people then post link detectors on that document or set of documents, and people by convention post to that subject area by linking to those canonical documents. And the result is that you've got spontaneous formation of meeting places about particular subject matters. And then, of course, you have the interesting issue of what if condensation points separately formed by communities that didn't know about each other, where the condensation points are really about the same subject areas. Well, in a system like this, somebody notices the two of them, just links them together, and now the link detectors for each community all of a sudden get informed about the other community, and the communities can be drawn together. Next. Actually, take that slide off for a moment. Let me just tie all of this together with a bit of a scenario. It's a simple scenario, but I think it helps make all of this concrete. Alice writes a paper, and she publishes it electronically, and it's out there for a while. She's interested in what other people have to say about it, so she posts a link detector on it. A while later, somebody else finds the paper, maybe by following backwards through one of the citations that Alice made. And in reading through Alice's document, ends up disagreeing with a particular point that Alice made, or having some other kind of comment on it. So let's say Bob makes a link between Alice's document and some other documents and some commentary by Bob about why Alice's document is refuted by this particular criticism in this other document. So Alice's link detector goes off. She follows the link that Bob made, realizes that there's something valid in that criticism, and mostly it was a misunderstanding of her own document. Mostly it was simply a confusion that could be fixed by Alice restating her document. So Alice restates the point she was making so that Bob's confusion should now be cleared up. Bob, when posting a criticism, wants to find out if the criticism, if the author of the work that he's criticizing attempts to answer the criticism, so that he can either respond or withdraw the criticism. So Bob posts a revision detector on Alice's document, so when Alice revises the document, Bob is made aware of that. And then Bob reads the new version of Alice's document using the version compare facility, does the differential reading, reevaluates whether his criticism is valid, and then edits his criticism accordingly. Okay. A social medium for documents can't only be a publication system. There's a lot of contexts in which you don't want to publish to the wide world, but you want to publish to a smaller group. Or you want to publish within a company or whatever. And there's all sorts of kinds of arrangements between people in terms of who gives responsibility or authority to read or edit what, under what conditions, and the rules by which that assignment of responsibility itself changes. And you can think of that as being a very simple constitutional system. That what it is, what we call the club system, is this little formal language for expressing authority relationships, where the authority relationship is not just who can read and edit what document, but who can change who can read and edit what document. And that's the sense in which I say it's constitutional, is that it's completely folded in on itself, so it takes care of expressing the rules by which the permissions change. So to take a concrete example, here's a document. Bob is the only guy that can edit the document. Bob is a club. Each of these circles is what's called a club. Bob wants to send this document through the Xanadu equivalent of electronic mail to Alice and Chuck as the blind carbon copy list. Blind carbon copy, dating back from the paper days, is give them each a copy of this, but don't let them see who has a copy of it. The way he arranges that is that the blind carbon copy club is something that only Bob can edit, but also only Bob can read. So Alice and Chuck can both read the document by virtue of their membership in the blind carbon copy club, but they can neither read nor edit who is a member of the blind carbon copy club. Similarly, a normal carbon copy club would have the same edit relationship with Bob, presumably, but would be self-read. Every member of it would have permission to read this club itself and see who the members are. There's a lot more to say about the club system, but I think I'll cut that one short. Next. A system like this has a tremendous filtering problem. There's when I'm looking at a document, I'm saying, what other documents cite this document? If it's a document that's had a moderate amount of citation, that by itself can be quite useful. But if it's a document that's really important and has been known to be really important by a large number of people for a long time, then the number of citations to it can be overwhelming, such that when I ask what things cite it, I get overwhelmed with tons of citation, most of which are junk. And the paradox here is, it's precisely for those important documents for which this process of finding good commentary on it is most important, and it's precisely on those for which it's least useful. So, our answer to this is a generalization of the answer that that literature uses in general with respect to helping people find the stuff that's worth reading from the stuff that isn't. It's largely reputation-based, not just reputation of author, but reputation of citing, for example, a journal that has a good reputation. What it's doing by including other articles within the journal is it's essentially lending its endorsement to them. It's giving the endorsement of the name of the journal to those other papers. It has an incentive to do that well, because otherwise the value of its reputation will be lowered. And other people, in order to have their papers be seen, have an incentive to try to write papers good enough that they will get endorsed by those endorsing agencies. So endorsements are used for a lot of things in Xanadu, but the particular thing that motivated their creation was the ability, when looking at a document that has been oversighted, that has been cited not oversighted, but cited so much that just doing an unfiltered query about what are all the citing documents would be overwhelming. You can filter that query by various kinds of endorsements. And among the kinds of endorsements, among the things that you can use the endorsements for are to find documents which are not so much direct citations of this document, but documents which themselves provide a guide to the citations to this document, which we anticipate will be written by people as guides, just as the guides we were talking about earlier are something that that people provide to each other to help navigate the original web. Next. We use text in talking about all the facilities of Xanadu because I think it's the clearest example, and I think it's the most important example. However, text is not the only media that Xanadu supports, and nothing that I've talked about is specific to text. Xanadu supports a variety of media, and all of these capabilities can be used as well with all of the others as they can with text. Next. I've talked about how documents are not an island, and that Xanadu is trying to make connections between documents. Through the interpersonal nature of Xanadu, as opposed to the traditional practice with word processors and personal computers, Xanadu is based on the assumption that people are not islands, that their use of documents is one that needs to be interconnected with a community of other people using those documents. But it's also the case that the Xanadu system itself isn't an island, that it's not like we're going to be the only electronic hypertext media out there, even the only electronic information storage and retrieval system for documents out there. There's been a ton of other ones, and we built the system to exist within that context. The way we did it is through a notion of e-space. We call e-space for external space. Next. And the basic idea of it is that you can, if you're using the Xanadu system in a way that coexists on the network with these other systems, you can use Xanadu as a window into those other systems. So by essentially transcoding the material that exists in those other systems, transcoding them virtually into Xanadu documents. So when you look at the document through Xanadu, behind your back the computer's going and fetching the contents from the other system, but it's presenting it to you as a Xanadu document, which means that material in all of these other systems are able to be linked to each other, are able to be edited in a fine-grained way with history and version tracking. And the result is not only that we address the problem that Xanadu is not an island, but all of these other systems that were built as islands now through Xanadu get to not be islands from each other. Because people can now, by viewing all of them through Xanadu, when they see a document in one that's linked with a link in Xanadu to a document in another one, they can follow the link, and the fact that they've interacted with 3 different systems should be fairly transparent. Next. Okay. As I mentioned, when we started this project, we were really thinking about literature and trying to generalize from the literary tradition. However, when we look back on what we've built, we find that we've borrowed at least as much from the nature of the medium of conversation as we have from the nature of the medium of literature. And I like to think that what we've done is we've really built a medium that has the best of both. That it has the dynamic give and take of conversation. That a wonderful example of which is that in conversation, when there's an argument going on in a room and somebody states a position and somebody states an argument with that position, and then there's no good counter-argument to the argument, the absence of counter-argument can be the absence of the response is very, very audible to everyone in the room. In paper literature, it's so hard to even find a criticism that to find that there is no answer to a criticism. Well, to find an answer to a criticism involves going backwards 2 steps. To find the lack of an answer to a criticism involves trying to go backward the 2nd step and finding that there isn't one, and that's almost impossible. The impact of this on the argumentative process, I think, gives it much more of a conversational dynamic. But where the expressions of ideas can be long and thoughtful ones. So altogether, I very much like to think that a system like this can have the dynamic give and take of conversation with the persistence and the thoughtfulness of literature. Next. Okay, Xanadu has been called the Golden Vaporware Project. It's been, it's also been referred to quite accurately as a 30-year-old startup company. So I want to emphasize, as I mentioned earlier, that except for transclusive royalties, everything that I've talked about in this talk actually works in working code with some bugs. okay? We've done the impossible part. Now there's just the hard part of the final software engineering to actually, get all the little nits, get the performance up, get it all solid and robust, etc. And we're making a lot of progress. The main thing that we have needed is investors, and I talked to Ted Nelson, the founder of Xanadu, last night on the phone, so there's some late breaking news here. We're negotiating with a potential investor. I just changed the slide last night. We're negotiating with a potential investor, and things look promising there. I can't tell you anything conclusive though. Okay, next. Okay, what are our plans for the future? Well, we want to get investment, hopefully from this investor. We want to complete both the server, the repository, the shared repository through which people post documents and read them, and the user interface to all of this, which is sort of an enhanced word processor is a way to think of it. Our first product customers, what the company is concentrating on is corporate documents for use by work groups within corporations. Obviously over here, a much more directly interesting use is use of technology like this within the university. The first product, the individual server is only able to support a moderate number of simultaneous users. So each server supporting its community of users is still an island from every other server. But our second so work groups are currently islands. But our second product is going to have work groups not be islands either. They're going to be servers themselves will be connected together. So anybody tied into any one of those repositories will seem to be tied into all of the repositories transparently, as if everyone was on that one repository, that the whole network of repositories gets stitched together into one large virtual repository. And that second product should be able to support certainly something at the scale of an entire campus, but also something at the scale of large-scale electronic publishing. That's very much what we had in mind when we built it. Next. And our further plans are we want to grow this system and become the World Electronic Library, the future home of mankind's literature. One of the slogans that Ted coined early on in the project is we wanted to build a system that Thomas Jefferson would be proud of. And, as one of the architects of the system, I tried to take that as much to heart as I could, however intimidating it was. And through the support of this medium for a better process of discourse, we want to improve the nature of public debate, and in so doing, attain the benefits of the open society yet again. Thank you.
All right, just the way we normally proceed is just with the open questions for the remainder of our time, which is a little more than 20 minutes.
Is there going to be some sort of a link between reputation and, for instance, reputation and royalties, so that if you have a somehow if you have a higher reputation and some kind of quality index, that when people look up your paper, you get higher royalties, for instance, or something like that?
No. The notion of reputation in the system is purely a subjective one. What we provide mechanism for is that you, as a reader, have your own way of judging, your own criteria to use with regard to what you consider to be higher or lower reputation. There's no global reputation index. There's ways of establishing reputation indirectly so that you as a reader can sort of say which endorsing organizations you trust, and then those organizations in turn, their subjective notion of who to further grant reputation to can carry. But different readers who trust different endorsing organizations end up with very different views of the overall world with respect to which authors have a higher or lower reputation. It would be fundamentally against the pluralistic philosophy of the system for there to be any objective reputation index. So the royalties, this is part of the royalty system brings up a lot of complicated issues, which is part of the reason why it's not there yet. But the basic idea is that authors would say how much they're charging, and then as you're reading a document, it consists of different pieces authored by different parties that have different royalty rates, and you're paying the aggregate royalty rate into the system, which then gets divided up. Yeah.
I have two questions. One is a question about the sort of composition of texts, and the other is a sort of policy question. You talk about ideas, but it seems to me that, well, I guess my question is, what do you mean by an idea? I mean, if you can take a text, I mean, the idea is your elementary unit, but how do you conceive that? And, I mean, isn't a text really made up of, ideas of very different statuses? So how, what are you...
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, the system itself can't directly contain and present ideas. All it can contain and present are articulations of ideas as people express them in documents. And basically, the entire range of ways in which people use both text and other media to express ideas, and the entire range of kinds of ideas people express in there. Everything from, TV cop shows to the National Enquirer to scholarly journals and et cetera. I think the system should be able to span that range. When I talk about the epistemological point of view behind the creation of the system, what to me is always the example that I use to think through the issues is scholarly journals and the nature of ideas as they're expressed there.
I guess what I'm asking, I mean, ideas, there's a certain structure of argumentation in which ideas are embedded.
Mm-hmm.
And how, are you taking the ideas out of that structure to link them? I mean, how do you...
No. In fact, the system seeks to do exactly the opposite, which is to have the expression of the idea be simultaneously visibly within the document that is the context in which the idea is written, as well as visibly and easily connected to the structure of argumentation about the idea. So when I'm reading a particular argument with an idea, initially in the document that's taking issue with the idea, I see the idea, the articulation of the idea disembodied from its original context, as in the quote example. So as it is on the screen before I take an action, the idea is disembodied in that sense, which is exactly the case in current literature when somebody argues with an idea and quotes it. But the fact that at the click of a mouse I can follow back into the original context keeps it from being disembodied the way it is on paper. Does that answer the question? Am I getting
Well,
that?
but it also seems to me that there are ideas in articles that aren't articulated. I mean, there are assumptions, for example. There are, and I'm wondering how you sort of point to them and how you link them and I mean, different schools are characterized by different assumptions about human nature, which are rarely articulated.
Mhm.
How are those captured?
One of the, first of all, let me say that there's nothing in the system itself that specially enables us to capture it any better than it's captured in paper literature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the process of capturing it is fundamentally a literary process. However, what I find is one of the best ways to cause unarticulated assumptions to be articulated is interdisciplinary work, because different fields have such different assumptions that when somebody tries to explain the content of one field to another, that process of thinking through what it is I understand when I'm wearing the hat of this field, thinking that through so I can explain it to people in that field, causes me be able to articulate things I wasn't able to articulate before. So that's in particular where I would expect to look in a hypertext medium for those articulations, is in the documents that are trying to be those bridging documents.
Can I ask one other question? This, you say that the purpose of the system is to serve the purposes of publicity. I mean, that you're trying to foster the publicity of knowledge and the sort of dissemination of knowledge. And yet it seems to me that one definition of publicity is freedom of access. And you're also talking about, and this is a question I have about a lot of Brad's email messages. But one of the components in your system is a whole royalty structure, which is in effect a series of obstacles to access to. So how do you reconcile that? This may be getting at some of these differences in assumption that you were just talking about.
Once again, we're not trying to reconstruct the world from scratch. What we're trying to do is go out into the world, see what systems work, try to understand the reasons why they work, try to amplify the reasons why they work, and hopefully leave behind some of the reasons why they don't. Right now, people do charge money for reading documents, and authors get paid. And that system of money flow through which authors get paid is one of the reasons why authors write. And we're seeking to build on that process, not replace it.
Right, but there's also an ideal in our society, say, of a public library. And it seems to me that, how would you, in some ways, it seems to me that you're working towards an ideal that weakens that tradition of public library.
Well,
There are people who believe in the idea, in your ideal, strongly enough that they support libraries and allow free access.
But then that's not, but then...
The libraries pay the royalty in both
Exactly.
cases. It's just now it's
but
static.
then there's an issue of the funding, and one is through taxes, and the other is through, say, patronage, and that's a very different sort of funding mechanism.
There are lots of
And then,
private libraries.
Excuse me?
There are lots of private libraries,
Right, but they're all,
too.
no, but the point is that, there is a tradition in this country that one important element of a democracy is a public library. And so,
okay.
The only difference is whether
There's
you
nothing
invest
that
in,
rules that out.
the only difference is whether the library invests in a computer terminal or a book.
Well, it's also, okay, right now, libraries subsidize the readers in the sense that they buy the book and the author still gets royalty from the library's purchase of the book. Similarly, in a Xanadu system, were there a public policy to preserve the institution of a public library, the idea that you could have, as you're saying, the government subsidize public terminals and subsidize the royalty stream into them. So as the readers read at the public library, the royalty stream is paid by the government. All that can be transferred over. Now, since this is a discussion about the system and not a discussion about economics and politics, I won't state my opinion of whether that would be a good policy, but the policy would transfer. Sorry, you were saying?
What about hackers in the system? In other words, right now, I can go to the library and pick up the econometrica, but I can't hack it. I can't do anything with it. Your system, especially some articles I read recently about Bulgaria and the great hackers that are coming out of there, how would you make it immune to hackers?
Well, there's one very simple decision that we've made. I think makes our system very resistant to a lot of different kinds of hacking attacks. Whether it makes it completely resistant, I don't know, but it makes it resistant to all the attacks I've been able to figure out, which is simply that the server does not run programs written by the user, that the shared server is a repository for people storing and retrieving information, but the program that runs on that server is simply the program that we wrote. It's not an operating system or a programming language in the sense of other people writing programs which they load into that server to run there. And the inability to inject new code into the server to run there makes it resistant to most hacking attacks. I won't say it's secure. I don't know, but it's a lot better than a lot of the systems that we hear about.
The way this is set up is an easier way to steal. For example, the way this is set up, that you pay by what you quote. That's the way this is set up. If I have a little program that I can use to paraphrase, I don't have to pay. And the reason for that is the U.S. copyright law, which says that you cannot copyright ideas. You can only copyright words in their right sequence or some portion thereof from text.
Actually, U.S. copyright law, fortunately or unfortunately, is much broader than that. So, for example, Gone with the Wind, the copyright holders of Gone with the Wind were able to prevent a sequel being written because a sequel that occurs in the same fictional universe with the same characters would have been considered to be
They
copyright.
may have done that through registered trademarks.
No, they did that with copyright. But in any case, to more specifically answer that question, the way we address issues of copyright violation, plagiarism, is simply that if somebody tries to steal by republishing a engineered rearticulation of the idea, a simple word-by-word substitution, well then, what they've done is they've posted on the system evidence of their crime. And now with the original posted with the timestamp and the new one posted with the timestamp, at some point, somebody in the future is going to notice both of these, make a link between them, and in so doing, announce to the readers of either the existence of the other, and the relative timestamps of the two documents will also be visible. So it's a very self-enforcing kind of issue. Yeah.
It seems that already the scope of the information that you're dealing with, just text, I mean all text, is overwhelming, to understate. How do you, I sort of think of Usenet in a way, because it's kind of to me like dumpster diving. You know, you spend a lot of time looking for information, you don't come up with a lot. How do you plan on avoiding that? How do you navigate? I mean, how do you plan on making this a useful system as opposed to just immediately just drowning?
Okay. Usenet, the horror of Usenet is very much, for those of you who don't know it, there's this system out in the world called NetNews, which is it's an electronic publication system in which people post many millions of characters worth of documents every day. And there are millions of people who are reading this stuff. And despite the very large-scale posting and reading, you hear exactly that complaint all the time. And people I know, frequently people who consider their time valuable, end up swearing off of Usenet because there's so much junk on the thing. So a lot of the mechanisms that I talk about in this talk, specifically the fact that links are a guide to the literature. You can use, using links you can write guides to the literature, and then you can navigate the web as led by various guides at first. And when you start to follow links, and when you follow links forward, you're also sort of depending on the good taste of the author of the document you're reading with respect to what he cites. That's very much also leveraging off of what works in current literary practice. And in terms of finding other documents that cite the document you're reading, following these links backwards, we depend on the reputation-based filtering, which is, once again, what it is that you depend on when the reason why there are bookstores, and even though the same books are free in the public library, and one reason is you can take them home, but another reason is that the bookstore has a lot less shelf space. Because it has less shelf space, the proprietor of the bookstore has had to exercise more judgment as to what books are worth carrying in the bookstore. And therefore, by learning in a city which bookstores' tastes correlate with mine, I'm able to use the presence of a book, and I'm able to use the bookstore to sort of have a higher hit rate in my browsing. So between that and use of endorsements to be the equivalent of scholarly journals, we're really trying to reproduce all the same kinds of reputation reputation-based dynamic that we see working in the world. Oh, and one more thing, is in Usenet, because it's not persistent, because everything that's written, everybody knows it's going to disappear from everybody's system in 3 weeks or something. Everybody writes for the trash can. And in this system, our goal here is that it's at least it's as persistent as our notion of literature would have it be. That the act of publication is permanent and for all time. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. First, what if someone wants to develop a hypertext system himself, and in other words, just not just a text, but all this other stuff, and link that in as one document? I'm assuming that can be done. And if it is do you plan on having some kind of pricing system that where you can price, like if someone wants to access the whole document versus a paragraph or a piece of the sound or whatever, and how is that whole pricing system going to work there? Or does the individual say, well, if you want to listen to the sound, it's going to cost you $2. For every page you read, it'll be X, but if you, and so on.
Well, with regard to the first part of the question, which is, can you take a document which is internally to hypertext and link it into the system? The answer is certainly. And as a matter of fact, that's where the Xanadu idea started. Everything I've talked about is the use of hypertext between documents, but where Xanadu started was the notion of hypertext to enable the expression of ideas within a document to proceed in a non-sequential way, so that readers don't have to follow one linear sequence in reading the document, but can branch off in various different ways and can go through various different kinds of media. In terms of your pricing question, I think that's a wonderful question. I wish I had a good answer for it. Once again, because the pricing issues, that among them the ones that you're raising, are difficult. That's one of the reasons why to define a first product that we could bring to market, whose initial market was going to be within organizations, both corporate and university, we've left the royalty support out of first product. Now, there's a lot of economists in the room. There's a lot of economists at this university. When we get around to actually trying to figure this stuff out, we desperately would love your help. I think that this issue of what the appropriate mechanism to support different pricing policies are, what the appropriate sort of computer-supported language for representing different, different author intents with respect to pricing, in the context of this medium, is a wonderful opportunity for interdisciplinary research at the intersection of economics, epistemology, literature, social and organizational learning, etc. So I encourage you all to think about that very question. We certainly don't have solutions there yet.
Yeah, well, I have one comment and one question. I think the comment is that on this question of royalties, anyway, whatever sort of scheme you devise, it's probably going to be a lot less costly now than buying books, because something like 70% of the cost of a book is the cost of printing up getting the paper and printing up the paper and delivering the book physically to a library. Royalties are at the most usually 15% of a book, and then you have to add in something for the editor's work. Anyway, so that's so much for the comment. I guess the question is, how much is this thing going to cost when you sell it? If I want to buy one, is it $100? Is it $1,000? Is it going to cost $10,000 and only be usable in groups of 40? Or
well, the answer to that, okay. Software is, the pricing of software is about as far from cost-based pricing as you can possibly imagine. The issue of how to price software is mostly a black art. In fact, I would say that the Agorix project here at the center has probably done more good thinking about the issue of pricing software than probably the rest of the world combined, from what I'm saying. But nevertheless, whether it's $100 or $1,000 or what, we still have no idea. For one thing, we're trying to make a deal with an investor. That investor gets to settle out of our business policy. We don't know where he's going to take it. So the answer is, I don't know. It's not driven by the technology. It's a marketing decision.
Well, let me just follow up. But do you see this, like, do you see the first release as something that you're going to aim at potentially at millions of people, or just, you start with a very specialized market like universities, you just sell to them initially?
There's been a lot of disagreement on strategy as to where you target the thing first. I don't have a strong opinion about that. I consider both ends of that spectrum to be plausible initial strategies. And also very much like input on that. But once again, the nature of the business interests of our investor will probably have a lot to say about that. However, what we've all built the technology for in the long term is the tens of billions of users, and which I understand that that's a little bit more than current Earth population. But I mean, no lack of ambition here. Yeah.
Yeah, question about persistence. You said earlier that it borrows from conversation as well as text. That's really like recording everything that anyone has ever said. Okay, where are you going to store that? I mean,
We're going to store it.
how are you going to store it?
We're going to store it on disk and on tape. A proposal well, what the rules are with respect to the public access publication system, what those rules are has not been set yet because we're not ready to deploy the electronic publishing system, the public access system. But one proposal that's been current in the Xanadu project for a long time is that the act of publication involves putting up enough money that the interest on that money is able to pay for the storage of that information in perpetuity. And the reason is that we take the notion of publication to be essentially a contract between the author and the readers. I mean, a sort of an implicit contract. I mean, sort of to take a look at what it's meant in the context of literature and come up with a crisper notion of that. That it's essentially a guarantee to readers that this thing that they're reading will always be around so that they can cite it and make arguments about it, and other people who read their document and want to go back to source material will have that source material there. So we really want to create that kind of persistence.
And so then if the person who writes it doesn't want to put up the money or doesn't have the money, they might find somebody who does want to based on screening it, and maybe that person might be called something like a publisher or whatever, right. And they could assign the royalty stream to that person and divide it up.
Exactly. There's the notion of author and publisher are separate. They'll frequently be the same person, but they are two separate roles, and they can certainly be different.
Okay, the actual question I wanted to ask before that was, how much of the success of the system depends on people being willing to do a lot of their reading off of a computer screen?
Doesn't everybody already do all of their reading off of computer screens?
Yes, sir. Yeah, they're easy to carry around.
As with current word processing documents, one will always be able to hit the print button and get a printout of the current document that you're reading. But the result of reading it on paper is that it has all of the disadvantages that paper currently has that this system is meant to address. So to a large extent, the advantages of the system, the thing that distinguish it from current paper-based literature, really only pay off in a big way when people are reading on the screen. And it's a shame that screens aren't as readable as paper yet, but they're getting closer. And I already, those of you, I'm curious, let me take a poll. How many people here have an email account? Okay. How many people, of the people who have an email account, how many of you read your email on the screen? How many of you print your email out and then read it on paper? Okay. I think that...
How many of you never print your email?
What?
How many people never print their email?
Oh, okay, how many people never print their email?
Very few.
Well, there might be a difference, though, between just one-page email versus looking at something on the screen for hours and hours and hours.
If you got a 6-page email, I guarantee you more than likely you'd be printing it out before you'd be sitting there reading it.
Well, one of the things that you can...
mail that long all the time.
Then you're the exception.
He's got a great screen.
One of the things that you can do in terms of the coexistence of the system with the paper medium is that when you get the printout, you can have that printout annotated in the margin with the existence of the various different links. And then, as you're reading on paper and you find the link that you'd like to follow, what you could do is, well, here's two example possibilities. You could go to the computer right then and follow the link. So go back to the computer when you find the link that you want to follow. Alternatively, you just go through and every time you find one of those links that you'd like to follow, you highlight it. And then later when you're back in front of the screen, then you sort of go back through all your highlights and follow those links. So I think that there's a lot of ways of doing, ways of integrating into the work with paper that are not as don't lose all the advantages. But this is a tuning process. Yeah.
Before you were sort of suggesting a lot of the model of this is the academic journal article, and in an academic literature. In this larger aspiration, does that model really work when you're not in the world of academic writing, which is heavily intertextual and interrelated, and when you get into the world of literature and movies and things like that?
I don't know. Well, I was about to say I'm not a heavy consumer of television, but that would be a convenient lie. I'd like to think that I wasn't a heavy consumer of television. I try not to be. But in any case, certainly my mind doesn't feel engaged when I am. But it's possible that this support for a process of discourse for people who use the system as a way to receive video images in a way that's no less mind-dulling than their current stream of video images, that the advantages of this system over current television won't really make a difference to them. And in which case they won't turn to this versus television. I just don't know. John Walker, the founder of Autodesk, which was one of Xanadu's earlier investors. Autodesk is the fourth largest software company in the world. At the first stockholders meeting where he was announcing the acquisition of Xanadu to the stockholders, he said that this system will be as important for those who think as television is for those who don't. Now, I'm not claiming that I believe we can live up to that, but one particular example of the use of mechanisms like this for non-textual media that very much helped in an educational process. There was a wonderful article in Scientific American about teaching kids language, which they found that kids acquire words at an extraordinary rate, mostly in spite of school, not because of school. But in trying to dive deeper into the process of acquisition of vocabulary, they put together a system in which the kids were able to watch various favorite movies of theirs, but then as they were watching the movie, at the bottom of the screen, sort of under the movie, different keywords that were part of the dialogue would happen, and the kids at any time could stop the movie and look up and find the definition of that word in the dictionary. So they would, because they were interested in the movie, but the movie was just a little bit above their heads. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, I think, is one of the examples. As they get intrigued by it, they become interested in figuring out the vocabulary, and so they follow what it was effectively linked into the dictionary. And that helped tremendously in the process of language acquisition. Yeah.
It strikes me that in terms of thinking of the marketing of this and the whole notion of the academic model of of academic discourse, that the people that would have the quickest and most profound use for this would be people who are in crucial industries like using atomic energy, people who were making airline repairs to airplanes, and that sort of person. Because if you were an airline mechanic who was making a repair and using this to go through a bunch of documents and then found that there was an anomaly in the relationship of the document to the repair that you had to make, that the design of the machine itself needed some sort of modifications, that kind of critical knowledge would be very quickly transmitted and very importantly transmitted. And so maybe the early piloting of this ought to be with those kinds of crucial industries or that sort of thing. Then another thought is that the largest employer in the United States is government, so that if you would have a lot of government people interacting with protocols and so on and so forth, that might be another place where this kind of ready discourse-based system could be used efficiently and necessarily.
Yeah, I think you interrupt. We're nearing the end of our allotted time here, so maybe we can have one or two more questions. But I would like to comment on, sure, the IRS could have some really creative uses.
Only if we're online. It's a couple of quick questions. One, do you plan on scanning in old classic books that people often access? And secondly, who's creating the links? I mean, I'm assuming that the individuals who are putting information on and doing the reading are creating their own links for themselves, but yet I'm assuming also that other people can read their links.
Given that they permitted other people to read links.
Okay.
The only, I mean, when I put information on the system, until I make it visible to other people, it's assumed to be private just to me.
Okay, and I guess the third one, I'm not sure if you answered this before, does it cost to post or to publish a document onto the system?
Storage costs.
So the person who actually does the writing will pay that cost himself, hoping that he'll recover it when other people read what he has written.
Right. The actual amount of money we're talking about, though, is extremely low. The amount of cost it would take to sit there with a printer and print it all out in paper is, I actually don't know how the prices compare, but I would not be surprised if just printing out your own one paper copy was more expensive than storing it on disk.
Who decides what goes on the system?
In terms of the public access system, the answer is free entry. That we're really talking public access. Anybody gets to get an account and post whatever they want on the system. Modulo, I mean, freedom of speech is very much our ideal. We exist within a legal framework that puts some restrictions on freedom of speech. We have to play by the rules of, the servers of the network. The servers that are in a given country have to play by the rules of that country. One thing that's interesting is, as different countries have different rules with regard to what can be published, and the whole thing is stitched together in one transparent network, so that you can reach through to the server in another country and read something that you're not allowed to publish here. In some sense, you get only the intersection of what people have prohibited gets effectively prohibited. But let's not spread that word too far.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much.
How's it going, buddy? Great, Paul. Great. I'm glad to see you. Yeah? How's it going for you? I'm back. How is your... Are you done with your work or not? How do I turn this off?